Worldwide, developing countries lose over $1 trillion every year in capital flight and tax evasion. Most of this wealth flows into large Western nations like the United States and Britain and enables their currencies to stay strong, whilst developing nations' currencies remain weak. But illicit flows into Western nations also had another unexpected side effect. The economies of the United States and Britain began to financialize. The origins of this financialization, or deindustrialization, go back to the 1960s.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War in mass marches, rallies, and demonstrations. President Johnson, meanwhile, let it be known that the FBI is closely watching all anti-war activity.
In the 1960s, U.S. economist Michael Hudson was working at Chase Manhattan Bank on Wall Street as Chase's balance of payments economist.
During the 1960s, the United States balance of payments deficit was entirely a result of foreign military expenditures.
Dollars were flowing out of the United States as a result of the cost of the Vietnam War. The United States attempted to prevent the dollars flowing to Vietnam from being deposited in foreign banks.
The government asked Chase to set up a branch in Saigon during the Vietnam War. And as you can imagine, it didn't have windows. It was sort of a fortress. It lost money, but the government went to Chase because it said, if you don't get this money that's being thrown off by the military in Vietnam, then it's going to go into French banks. It'll get to General de Gaulle, and you know what he's going to do every month. He's going to cash it in for gold. That's what the United States was trying to stop.
The US was not successful in stopping the outflow of money, so it began to hatch a different plan. In 1967, Michael Hudson was handed a memo by a former State Department employee.
In 1967, I was given by a former State Department employee in the elevator at Chase Manhattan a memo from the State Department urging that Chase Manhattan would take the lead in helping the United States become the Switzerland of the world, meaning the flight capital. The State Department, through Chase, asked me to estimate how much money do you think is available if America were to become the new Switzerland, and how do we do it? The plan was to organize offshore banking centers in the Caribbean and elsewhere, and the hot money wouldn't come directly into Chase because that wouldn't be nice and very legal. What happened was that the Latin American criminals, other criminals, drug dealers, all sorts of organized crime, would put their money in the offshore Caribbean banks, and these offshore banks would then deposit the inflow in the head office.
By moving offshore dollars back into the United States, the US was able to stop the outflow of dollars and support the value of its currency.
The last few months I worked for Chase Manhattan in 1967. I was going up to my office on the 9th floor, and a man got onto the elevator and said, I was just coming to your office, Michael. Here is a report that I'm from the State Department, CIA. We want to calculate how much money we could get if we set up bank branches and became the bank for all the criminal capital in the world. He said, look, we figured out we can finance, and he said this in an elevator, that we can finance the Vietnam War with all the drug money coming into America, all of the criminal money. Can you make a calculation? So I spent 3 months figuring out how much money goes to Switzerland from the drug dealings, what's the volume of drug dealings. They helped me with all sorts of statistic on that. And they said, we can become the criminal capital of the world, and it'll finance the dollar. And this will enable us to afford the spending to defeat communism in Vietnam and elsewhere. And if we don't do that, the bomb throwers will come to New York. So I became a specialist in money laundering. Nothing could have been better. I mean, I had all the statistics. I had the help of all of the government people, explaining to me how the CIA worked with the drug dealing and the criminals and the kidnappers to raise the money. So it would be off the balance sheet funding, and Congress didn't have to approve it when they would kill people and do revolutions. And they were completely open with me. And I realized they'd never done a security check on me. I wanted to do a study of the balance of payments of the whole United States. So I went to work for Arthur Andersen, which was at that time later one of the big 5 accounting firms in the United States. Later, it was convicted, got involved in the Enron scandal and was classified as a criminal enterprise and closed down, but I was working before the other people went to jail, or before they closed down Arthur Andersen. So I spent a year applying my balance of payments analysis to the U.S. balance of payments, and finally finished. And I found out that the entire U.S. balance of payments deficit in the 1960s, since the Korean War, the entire balance of payments deficit was military spending abroad. The private sector of trade and investment was exactly in balance. Tourism, trade, investment, exactly in balance. All of the deficit was military. And I found that very interesting. So I turned it in. My boss, Mr. Barsanti, came in to me 3 days later, and he said, "I'm afraid we have to fire you." And I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, we sent it to Robert McNamara, who was Secretary of the World of Defense and later became an even more dangerous person with the World Bank, which probably is more dangerous to the world than the American military." That's another story. And he said, McNamara said that we at Arthur Andersen would never get another government contract if we publish your report. This is very, and in all of the Pentagon papers that later came out with McNamara, there's no discussion at all of the balance of payments cost of the Vietnam War. This is what was driving America off gold. At Chase Manhattan from 1964 till I left, every Friday the Federal Reserve would come out with its weekly statistics, and we could trace the gold stock. Everybody was talking about General de Gaulle cashing in the gold because in Vietnam it was a French colony, and the American soldiers and army would have to use French banks. The dollars would go to France, and de Gaulle would cash it in for gold. Well, the Germany actually was cashing in more gold than de Gaulle, but they didn't make speeches about it. So I could see that the war spending was going to drive America off gold. There were 3 people known as the Columbia Group in Chicago saying the Vietnam War is going to destroy the American monetary system as we know it. And that was Terence McCarthy, my mentor, Seymour Millman, a professor at Columbia University School of Industrial Engineering, where Terence also taught, and myself. And we would basically go around New York City and giving speeches. My first article that I wrote for published was a Ramparts magazine called The Sieve of Gold, all about how the Vietnam War was going to force America off gold, which it did, of course, in 1971 when President Nixon in August stopped the gold. Well,